What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Ludwig's Podcast. I am John Ludwig, and I don't even know what number this episode is, but it's another solo episode. I kind of struggled with what I wanted to talk about on this episode. The last few have been stories about road trips and automotive projects, and I kind of wanted to stay on that wavelength until I get another guest on the podcast where we can kind of switch things up and listen to someone else tell some stories. So I thought about talking about the 2014 solo trip in my Corvair once my father and I finished that. But I think what I'll do is answer some questions that you guys asked on Instagram and hopes that that will kind of expand into more conversation and maybe lead into different stories that, I haven't talked about on the podcast in the past. So to get you guys up to speed on some news, the Ludwig's Garage shirts are at my friend's printers getting printed as we speak. And I can't thank you guys enough for your patience on this. Doing a pre-order right before Christmas, especially this past year during COVID, was probably a really bad idea since the mailing services throughout the holiday season are always pretty bad. But this particular year, around COVID and all that, especially with suppliers and availability of stock for the shirt garments themselves, everything was just kind of like stacked up against me. And I didn't think about that before the pre-order went out. So I've only had a few people reach out, and it's literally been, hey, just looking for an ETA on shirts. And it's been 3 weeks now. So I apologize on that. But I spoke with my buddy Mark this morning. Shout out to Mark Gamma from Gamma's Printing. He's been scrambling to try to get all the garments in. He's basically had to get shirts from a handful of different warehouses around the country to get this amount of XL, that amount of XL and the other garment or whatever from different places. So big thanks to him for scrambling and getting this done as quickly as possible. So those will be going out soon. They're going to get drop shipped here to me, and then I'm going to package them all up here and send them out. So thank you guys so much for that. I don't know what else is really new. Oh, I picked up, if you guys follow me on Instagram, you guys know I picked up another project, automotive project, but nothing that's going to be on the front burner anytime soon, at least not that I know of. So my good friend John, who was one of my childhood best friends, had started a 1970 Super Beetle project with his father back probably 20 years ago, probably right around 2000. And it was a running, driving Beetle when his father first purchased it. But the whole plan was to kind of do a restoration project with his son, John, my friend. And I remember being in high school when they first started tearing that thing apart. And it wasn't until a few years outside of high school that we kind of lost touch and kind of went our separate ways outside of school. But I do remember seeing that Beetle with the body off of it, the pan in like their garage. The Beetle body itself was in like a carport next to the garage, and they were going through the whole pan. They did everything. They basically restored the whole pan, a narrowed beam with an adjustable front end, and they went through the motor. They did a ton of work to the motor. They bored and stroked it out. They did a lot of internals, valves, pistons. They really made it a pretty hot motor. It started life as a 1600 dual port motor, and I don't remember where it ended up. I think it's just shy of 1800 cc now, and it was a full running driving car. So they've got the transmission, they've got everything in the car. But as their paths continued, John had kids, and they kind of, the project just kind of became this thing that got hauled around wherever John moved. So John's kind of in the process of fixing and flipping a house that he's in right now and moving. And the car has just been underfoot for the last time, basically. And he gave me a call and he's like, hey, is this something that you'd be interested in? And although I've got a few projects, as you guys know, that still need to get finished, definitely my cab over. But the Q45 I brought home from Los Angeles in November, and I'd really like to get the Sentry buttoned up and just have that ready to list for sale. I think that's going to happen this year. I think. We'll see. Going into this new shop space, especially alone, I've been thinking about, possibly selling that car to kind of move on to the next step, the next big project. But that being said, the Q45 is going to be a light project. That one's going to get sent out the door hopefully this spring. Would like to continue on the cab over. But this picking this project up, being a 1970 Super Beetle, especially not being finished and the body's got some rot in it, allows me to have a full Beetle pan on the back burner, basically, when I find another project that would be an awesome pairing to a Beetle pan, kind of like my BMW 700. So oddly enough, the BMW 700 project wasn't the first kind of like pipe dream Beetle pan project I had in mind. There's a few others that were kind of like man, that thing would be so cool to put over a Beetle pan type project. The 700 just presented itself naturally, and I just went down that path with my father. So since we've already done a project of that magnitude, and I'd say the 700 was exceptional simply because of the amount of work that body needed. That unibody car had failed in a lot of its structural integrity because it had just rotted right into the ground. So a lot of work had to be done to build structure inside that body. We spent a lot of time building like a tubular chassis inside that body to give it rigidity. So although I'm not ready to take on a project of that scale in my shop that I'm hopefully starting here in the next few weeks, it'll be good to have a Beetle pan all ready to go. That way, if I find that one of the big top cars that I've always wanted to put over a Beetle pan for cheap with no motor, or it's too rusty underneath, or, the stars align, I won't have to go searching for a pan and a motor and all that. So in the meantime, if I get a few projects punched out, I've kind of thrown around the idea in my head of using that stroker motor in the 700. The 700 has a fairly stock 1500 single carb, not a lot of work done to it. I mean, we did a custom exhaust. A buddy of mine swears it has a cam in it just by the sound of it. I don't know. I'm going to go with that it's all stock inside. But this motor, having been built, and it's a dual port, do 2 carburetors on it, it'd be really cool to put that in the 700 and make that thing just kind of like a complete rocket ship, more so than it is now. But that's kind of on the back burner as well. The only time I'd really entertain the idea of putting that stroker motor in the 700 is if I pulled that motor and trans out to tub the rear, which is something I've talked about on the podcast and something that I really want to do in the future at some point anyway. So whether or not a future Beetle pan project presents itself and that stroker motor would just fit really well in whatever car that is, I might toy with the idea of putting that motor in the 700 when I tub it. And that's going to be a full-blown project. So I'm going to wait till I've got a pretty clear schedule till I start that project in depth, I suppose. So really cool to have that here. It's obviously one more thing I got to haul around or get out of the way. It's literally sitting out back next to my dad's shop, next to my cab over. So the cab over won't be making its way over to my shop, but it's good that it's literally in line with the overhead door in my dad's garage. So if we have to, we can roll that thing in and get working on that, because that's just been a bane of my existence the last few years. It kills me that the thing sits outside. So the guy I bought it off of had basically a warehouse, and he had a bunch of old trucks and had enough space inside where they could sit. So it's kind of been killing me that thing's been sitting outside under the weather. I do my best to not keep a tarp on it, because that just ruins the patina and the paint that is left. So that's the latest on automotive projects. I've been buying some tooling and some things to furnish the shop space out with. The landlord's guys have just started work in that unit. I'm going to swing over there tomorrow probably and see if they've gained any ground, if any, so far. But a 2-post lift is on order. There's an appointment to get that thing installed before the end of the month. So hopefully the 1st of February, I'm going to be in there. So I'll be making a lot of updates. I really want to put out another, like a regular YouTube episode about what's going on. I filmed a bunch of the Beetle. I didn't film much of actually going to get the Beetle, but I might integrate talking about the Beetle and showing you guys the car and the pan, all the parts that came with it, as well as maybe some shop updates, and get like a 15 or 20 minute episode up so you guys can visually see what's going on rather than a long-winded podcast episode. So this, for 2021, I've really, really wanted to be better about getting an episode out a week if I can. I know the weeks fly by. Being self-employed, I'm not stuck to a Monday through Friday schedule. It's really hard to budget my time. That has been my New Year's resolution the last few years in a row, has been to manage my time better. So I'd really like to get into some sort of structured schedule where I'm recording a podcast episode. If it's got to be solo, it's here at my house, so I can dedicate the time to do that. But that being said, I want to get a lot of episode content up as well. It's going to be easier once the shop's in and I can get back working on some of my projects and they're not just sitting outside, in my car trailer under the carports, just waiting for spring to come. Because unfortunately, if I don't have access to my dad's garage at the moment, there's really not much content to be had unless I'm doing the podcast or traveling. So as we all know, this current climate, traveling's been a little tough. So I think what I'll do is just answer some of these questions that you guys sent in on Instagram and expand on some of those as best I can. This one's going to be a short episode anyway, but just wanted to get one up so you guys had something to listen to this week. And thank you guys so much for the motivation. Every episode that comes out, any of you guys that either reshare that you've been listening to it or watching it or have comments or you just private message me, about something that I was talking about that you can either relate to or a question that you can answer, it serves as motivation. So I thank you guys a lot for all of just the connection, the connection, whether or not it's support or it's compliments or constructive criticism. It's all taken very, very heavily on my end. So there's no order on these. And I honestly haven't read these out yet, even to myself. So hopefully I'll be able to come up with some quick answers. First one, the swoops, my buddy Greg. What are you going to do without Corey there? So to give some substance to that, Corey is currently out in New York at the swoop shop for this week, helping him out in the shop. He's done it once or twice before and loves going out there and working with Greg. So what I'm going to do without him, I'm going to sit here alone and I do most of the talking anyway. I feel bad. So yeah, I'm doing just another solo podcast. But yeah, Corey and Greg do some awesome things. And so it's cool that they're working together on some projects. Mason Gavin, my buddy Mason, who puts on Riverside Chattanooga, says, if you hosted your own show or meet, what would it be like? So this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. With the inception of the Governor's Club at the end of 2011, I've always wanted to do some sort of curated car show along the lines of First Class Fitment and like Riverside, where it's a selection show. You get a chance to hand select the cars you want at your show, and in that same aspect, lay the grounds out and literally choose what car is going to be where. Whether or not you do only 100 cars or you choose to do 400 cars, and you literally Mason goes deep as well. Mason actually puts out builds almost like a small scale layout of the show and uses Hot Wheels to kind of lay everything out. And it's really kind of cool. It gives you a visual of what your car show might look like. So I've dove deep into the depths of logistically what I would want a car show to look like, or logistically how I would want it to run, and aesthetically what I would want it to look like. And as the years have gone by and I've met more and more people who put on shows of all sizes and scales, whether or not it's Nikolai with Simply Clean that has a similar layout to Riverside where there's no trophies, there's no awards. It's literally like a sanctioned giant car meet that's curated and has selected cars with vendors and booth cars and all that sort of stuff. Simply Clean is massive. If you guys have been to that show, usually in November in Daytona, Florida, that show is massive. Mason puts on Riverside, obviously. That show's a little bit smaller, but same idea. No awards, no classes, just like a real big car meet of selected cars. Guys like Mike Tolliver, who put on the Stance Wars shows. I mean, those are stadium shows. Jay Martinez does the Tuner Evo shows. I can't imagine what it's like logistically to put on a show like that, where you're trying to rent out the MetLife Stadium or something insane. So I've never wanted to do something at that scale. I think I've always liked grassroots vibes. I like the big shows too, but as far as if I was going to put one on, I kind of know where my limits are or where my skill set lays. And I feel like smaller grassroots curated things are kind of where my skill set lays. So, or where it lies, I should say. So I've kind of talked myself out of doing a car show. And if I did a car show, it would probably have the Governor's Club name on it. But every year in Ocean City, Maryland, which used to be H2O, obviously, I do a TGC meet there. That's usually really big. Obviously, the last few years, Ocean City's gotten real crazy. And we've already talked about, 2021 Ocean City and whether we may or may not go. It's not looking good. At least for me. I don't know if I'm going to make it down there this year. But I've done some big TGC meets, and I really, really enjoy it. So I don't know what the future holds, especially with what's going on now too. But Riverside 2021, I'll plug Riverside, March 20th of this year, 2021. And if I can make it down, which I'm hoping I can, I've made it the last 3 or 4 years in a row now, we're going to be doing a Governor's Club pre-meet. And I don't know what night that would be, probably the Thursday night before the show on that Saturday. But as most of you guys know, I sold my Ford F-350 and have not replaced it yet. So I don't have a truck to haul any of my cars or the booth setup. And moving into a shop space in February with the show in March, the next month, the only way I'd really go is to bring the TGC booth, merchandise, and vend the show and hopefully make the trip make me money. Whereas before I just looked at it as like a week-long holiday. So taking on this shop space, I need to really kind of focus and work more. So I'm hoping I can still travel as much as I want and not take steps backwards. So I really don't have a steady answer for that question. I like everything. Most of you guys know that as far as cars are concerned, as far as genres of cars, brands of cars, stylings, and all that. So I think it would be something similar to Simply Clean in Riverside, where it'd be a hand-selected group of cars that were from all spectrums. And in my opinion, that makes for an even cooler car show because you kind of get a flavor of everything. You can kind of see things you like, maybe some things you don't necessarily like, but maybe they get some gears turning for inspiration. I know that's what I go through when I go walk around a car show like that. I start looking at things that maybe aren't up my alley, but it kind of twists my ideas about certain things and kind of helps, light a flame for different motivations, I guess, and different styling aspects or something. So yeah, it would be an all-encompassing, no awards type deal. Just because I really like that vibe. I really like that layout where you don't have a lot of trophy hunter people coming to your show. It cuts out on a lot of, those same types of people complaining about whether or not they, got a trophy or not. And that's super distasteful. I don't like that at all. I get that there's a realm of people that build cars to win car shows. I mean, they're show cars, and that obviously has its own place. But I just like the grassroots vibe of just hanging out in the parking lot and looking at a bunch of really cool cars. So obviously on the backside of that, you get people who complain about their cars not being accepted. So that's inevitable as well, I believe. And that's really too bad. That's kind of why I haven't done a show. I feel like it would be successful. I'd love to do a Northeast show in the autumn, because up here in the Northeast in the fall, it's just one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's just unbelievable. And so I've talked to a lot of my friends who would travel from far beyond to come support or vend, bring their crew, bring their cars. I think it would be something amazing. It's something that I've put a lot of thought into, but I've hesitated doing because, I wouldn't want it to be about making money. It would have to at least support itself, so you're not taking a bunch of money out of your pocket. And I'd really want it to be something good that a lot of people, I wouldn't want to deal with people complaining about their cars not being accepted. I've talked about doing a Governor's Club show that wasn't promoted at all. Just called 50 or more, maybe between 50 and 100 friends and said, hey, this is the show. We're keeping it off social media. You have a +1. Use your discretion. Bring a friend that is of same character with a car of the same caliber, but, keep it quiet. And this is the date and all this. And have a bunch of vendors on board, and have like this almost like secret society show to almost skirt the flack you might get from people who register and then badmouth you publicly online because their feelings are hurt that they didn't get accepted to the show. Their car didn't get accepted to the show type deal, So I've thought about all sorts of different ways to do it. I think it'd be really cool to have some sort of weird Illuminati style show where it just takes place and doesn't reach the social media level until the day of, but not relish in that whole vibe to where it's almost just like it's a big car meet with a bunch of friends and there was no public promotion for it type deal. I don't know. I really don't know. I've got all sorts of weird ideas in my head and I haven't landed on one that I felt like was the one. So here we are. It's a good question though, Mason. You and I have spent lots of time talking about it. You know exactly my wavelength and the things I've kind of thought about. And maybe one of these years I'll make something happen. Right now, I feel like I've got too much on my plate, though. That's for sure. Let me see. Dennis Big D, D-E-E at the end. What's your thoughts on Japanese vans like Nissan Homie or Toyota Hiaces? I'm looking for one. Yeah, I love Japanese vans. Quietly have searched for a few. Some of the old Toyota vans. Some of the USDM ones that you can find here in the States, too. I like weird stuff. And those weird Japanese vans, those like cab forward vans are so cool. I actually just saved a photo of one I saw on Instagram a few days ago just to have in my camera roll because it's something I really want to put together someday. So I'm always looking at weird stuff and Japanese vans are definitely some of those weird cars. Alex McGinnis, 09. When are you and Corey going to do a music podcast? Also, favorite show or concert you attended. So, yeah, Corey and I have talked about doing a music podcast quite frequently. Some of the questions that come in on Instagram that we answer on the podcast have turned into small music podcast episodes. I'm a musician. I'd argue that that's my first passion. I basically grew up in my dad's garage, so cars are my first passion. But I picked up a guitar in like 7th grade, and nothing has moved me like music has. Music, especially composing and writing, it's something that I don't do as often anymore, and it's something I'd really like to change. Unfortunately, music requires a ton of time for me to write. I'm almost like that writer that needs to escape to the cabin in the woods with no cell service, no power, no nothing. Maybe not no power, but you know what I mean? Like escapes to a cabin in the woods to write his novel and doesn't come back to civilization for months if need be. And I'm kind of like that with music. To get into the right headspace, I almost need to dedicate a lot of time to it. I chalk a lot of that up to being rusty now too, since basically from 2003 to 2009, music was a huge part of my life and I played out playing shows, touring. I did all that on top of the BMX thing for a long time. So for the last 10 years now, from like 2010 on, I haven't played any shows. I just dabble here in my home studio and I'm my own worst critic, but it's gotten worse over the years. So I'll sit in here and I'll write stuff and then I'll get like a 30-second piece laid out, not even done. And I'll basically bin it. And then I'll come back to it like maybe a month later. And I'm like, man, why didn't I do anything with that? I really like that. So I'd like to start doing more music aimed podcasts, and I don't know really where I would, I've got some stories from the road. I'd like to have friends of mine who are musicians in full-time touring bands on here too. I mean, obviously a touring band isn't a thing since 2020, but yeah, we'll probably do one here pretty soon. I'll probably put out some specific questions or at least some notes. So we have like a structured music podcast where we can actually talk about some things in detail, I suppose. But as far as my favorite show, so the weird thing is I was never a show goer. As far as like big bands, there's a few that I went to, but if like most of the shows I attended, I was either playing or a friend's band was playing, whether or not a friend's band was in town on tour or I was out of town and their band was in the same town I was in or whatever. Man, one of the top, so there's a few that stand out. there's been a lot. I've played a lot of shows, attended a lot of shows, but I guess the few that stand out would be, oh boy, in 2002 or 2003 as a junior or senior in high school. I can't remember what year exactly. I saw the Starting Line and Taking Back Sunday play at the Palladium in Worcester, Mass. And this was right when Tell All Your Friends had just come out. Taking Back Sunday's first album. And so they were a new band at the time. And that was really cool because I had previously just gotten into Thursday. And Thursday's album, their second album, Full Collapse, had just come out. And I was hooked on that dynamic overlap of vocals. Just this like chaotic vocals everywhere, lots of harmonies. Vocals were like an instrument now, and you heard them all over the place. And Jeff from Thursday was phenomenal at that. And Taking Back Sunday was really one of the first like pop punk bands that really kind of started using vocals as an instrument as well, and overlapping lots of vocals. Their first album, Adam Lazzaro was always the front lead singer of Taking Back Sunday. But the first album, or Tell All Your Friends, the first like full album that came out, had John Nolan, he was one of the guitar players, but he was the backup singer. But I loved John Nolan's voice. And so to see them play around the same time that their record had come out was really, really cool. John Nolan went on to do Stray Light Run, and I don't remember if that was with his sister. There was a girl that was involved in that band that was, their voices really complemented each other, and that was really cool. But that show specifically stood out because Taking Back Sunday got huge after that. So it was kind of cool to see them at the birth of their success. In 2005, a girl I was dating for my 20th birthday took me to see two of my favorite bands. And this was at the Axis in Boston before it became the Hard Rock Cafe or Hard Rock show venue, right on Lansdowne Street, right next to Fenway. It used to be called the Axis. And a lot of you guys that were in the music community or just went to a lot of shows back in the early to mid 2000s, remember the Axis. It was a really cool venue, super small. Two of my favorite bands. It was like a surprise for my 20th birthday. Oddly enough, these two bands existed on two totally different genres or two totally different planes of music, but they grew up together, so they were really good friends. One of them was the Juliana Theory, and the other one was Zao. And the Juliana Theory was kind of like pop punk meets post-hardcore. Well, they're like emo pop punk with a little bit of an edge to them. And Zao was a Christian hardcore band turned Christian metal band from the early 90s on through. So by 2005, they were on their second singer with like their second encapsulation of a band. Like they had gotten way heavier, a little bit more metal by then. In the 90s, they were a little bit more like hardcore-ish, and that was my favorite genre, or my favorite version of Zao. So seeing Zao and the Juliana Theory at the Axis was really cool. But also up there with one of my favorite shows was actually the last show I ever played. And that was in 2009 at a venue in Manchester, New Hampshire called Rocco's. And a lot of my friends from New England that listen to this, and especially New Hampshire, you guys remember Rocco's. I mean, that place was wild. It was basically a bar. The venue was upstairs, and the floor was not OSHA approved at all, or did not meet building code. I mean, that floor was ready to collapse, especially when they had hardcore shows or dance shows and people were moving around a lot. But in 2009, I played an acoustic show with my project called How Lost We Are with Anthony from Bayside and Vinny from The Movie Life and I Am the Avalanche. And Vinny and Anthony were on like an acoustic tour, so it wasn't with the full band Bayside or I Am the Avalanche, but getting a chance to play an acoustic show with Bayside and I Am the Avalanche was really, really cool. And oddly enough, that was the last show I played, February of 2009. With the exception of a few like open mics. I moved to Florida in March of 2009 or later that month in February, and played like a few open mics at some coffee shops and stuff, but never Never really played like a show to like, I wasn't booked at this venue or had a show bill or anything like that. So yeah, so my last show to play with Bayside and I'm the Avalanche is really cool because I was really into the movie life back when Vinny was doing that, and I was really into the early Bayside stuff. And I think by '09, I think The Walking Wounded had just come out. I can't remember. But Dear Tragedy was one of my favorite songs. And yeah, Walking Wounded was a phenomenal album. I think that was right around that same time. So yeah, so I'd love to do a music podcast. I'd love to get back into music. I mean, I talk about this all the time. The Rising Sea, there's my plug, Instagram, The Rising Sea. It's mostly just acoustic stuff. I just record with my phone here in the studio, but there is a link to the SoundCloud on that Instagram as well. And unfortunately, what's on the SoundCloud is basically unfinished demos from 2009 till like last year. There's only a few of them, but they're pieces that I got done the farthest and then decided to just put it up on SoundCloud rather than letting them live in hiding on a hard drive. So you guys can hear some of that there. There's some acoustic stuff. Some of the Rising Sea basically is like an ambient, atmospheric indie rock band, my project. That's the overall sound for it. Because it's just me, there is a lot of acoustic stuff that I post up there because it's a lot easier for me to just write something acoustically. With the production aspect of what I want the Rising Sea to sound like, takes that headspace time that I was talking about, to sit in here in the studio and write layers, write lots of strings, lots of sequencing and backing tracks, and lots of depth, long tracks with deep layers. And I'd love to be able to budget a few days a week to just sit in here and write that stuff. Let me see. Aoife. I'll spell this Instagram handle out because Aoife's name is traditionally spelled. It's AOIFEMA, and I think it's an L1. Bucket list car you haven't ever owned before. Also, when are you selling those steering wheels? So the steering wheels, most of those are for sale. The Volkswagen ones I'll sell, and I'll have to repost them on Instagram. I've got a Corrado steering wheel. I've got a handful of early Mark 1 steering wheels in like the weird colorways. I've got like an LS. I've got a blue 2-spoke LS Mark 1 wheel, which has that like leather pleather look to it. I also have a full plastic blue 2-spoke early Mark 1 wheel. Got a handful of stuff. I'll probably list the stuff I want to sell. I've got some old ivory Mercedes wheels that aren't for sale. I've got that Alpina E23 wheel that I'm going to keep as well. But as far as bucket list car I haven't owned before, I'll go with bucket list car that I could probably afford, maybe. And there's too many now that I'm thinking about it. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. It's like someone asking me what my favorite band is. There's too many. What happens is I'll get on Facebook Marketplace and I'll find 3 of them. So here's kind of a bucket list. And it's not gonna wow anybody. But one of my bucket list cars that I literally just brought up to my father yesterday. I went to go look at a truck in southern New Hampshire about an hour and a half from here. And my dad went with me just in case I brought the thing home. So we had about 3 hours in the car together. And I've always wanted a Chevy too. Always. So this was the first generation Nova, by the way. So like a 62 to 65 Chevy 2 Nova. But I want a 4-door or a wagon in a straight 6 with a column shift. Like I want a basic spec, like, which obviously is the affordable version. Obviously the 2 doors with the V8s are more sought after and more valuable. But my Uncle Tim, when I was a kid, had a white 4-door straight 6 with a 3-speed on the column that just sat around in the backyard. And it had this really cool patina. I would argue that car was the first car that sparked my love for cars that were weathered or seasoned. And it's stuck with me ever since. Back then, when I was just a kid, I just rode my bike by it and just thought it was a cool looking old car. I never thought that one day I would actually seek out a car that looked like that to make it something of my own and much cooler than it would be just sitting in the woods. So I guess technically that would be a bucket list car. And I haven't owned one yet, but I was talking to my dad about, if I sell the Century or I free up some space and some time, some projects, I'm going to search for and hopefully get a Chevy 2. And I'd love to bag one, put it on a cool set of wheels, one of my favorite set of wheels or something. Got some stuff in mind. I know exactly aesthetically what I would want it to look like. So I'll go with that, because that's kind of like whispering to me right now. I think I'll be searching for one here pretty soon if the opportunity presents itself. Let me see. Hey, I'm Brick says, if you could build any newer year Euro car, what would it be? Anything from 2013 and newer, realistic to you? Boy, I don't know. So I really, really, really love the new Volkswagen Arteons. I really do. And I don't remember if Corey and I were talking about this on a previous podcast, but I passed a bone stock one on the highway back about a month or two ago. And being black, it didn't have anything done to it really, but I love flagship cars and I love Volkswagens. And, I know they're kind of expensive, and I know they haven't sold the way, people wanted them to sell, but I'd probably do an Arteon. I remember when the CC came out, I really liked the CC too, but I mean, you said realistic to you. So, I mean, something realistic would probably be a Volkswagen, because, we could talk about new BMWs from 2013 on, or Mercedes AMGs or stuff like that. But something realistic, newer, would probably be, like an Arteon, a Volkswagen of some sort, because that'd be more realistic to me rather than taking on some crazy monthly payment. Let's see. Tire Problems says, would love to see Swoops back on here. P.S. I still got this root beer for you. Hey, yeah, message me. I know we had a line of communication for a while. I'll send you my address. I wanted to put it out, and I'll put it out on Instagram too. For 2021, if people are so inclined, DM me on Instagram and I'll give you my shipping address, my mailing address, and send me root beers that you find. You don't even have to ask me if I've had it before. You can just send me these root beers, and I'll basically rank them or talk about them on the podcast. Before I started the podcast, I really wanted to. I had this idea of opening each episode with a review of a root beer, and I have enough in my collection where there would be enough. There'd be more than enough to do a year's worth of episodes, or a couple years of episodes if I was doing one a week. So what I want to do for 2021 is get you guys to send me some root beers that, maybe I have, or I have had, or maybe not. But I'll shout you guys out. I'll enjoy the root beer on the episode and kind of talk about it, and maybe give like a 5-minute, maybe not even, but a quick blurb at the beginning of each episode about that root beer and what I think of it and where it's from and all that. So that's kind of what I've wanted to integrate into the podcast, especially for this upcoming year. But yeah, as far as Swoops, we've been talking about it. It's just tough because he's like 4.5 hours from here, and he's super busy in his shop. I'm going to be pretty busy, here where I am pretty soon. But I'd really, once winter's over, I'd really like to start traveling around more, if COVID starts to kind of chill out a little bit. But yeah, I'd love to have Swoops back on. We have tons and tons of content to talk about that we didn't get to on the first episode that he was on. Let me see. Low VRT says, what's your favorite Joe Rogan episode? I don't know. Believe it or not, like Joe Rogan's podcast was actually the first podcast I started listening to. And I think it's solely because, I can't remember now. It's been probably 3 or 4 years. I'd say maybe 4 years. And the only reason why I started listening to it was because he had someone on that I was really interested in listening to. And I can't remember who that was. It was right around the time that he had like Tom DeLonge on from Blink-182. That wasn't what brought me to his podcast, but I do remember watching that episode as one of the first ones I watched, and was like, this is so bizarre. Because all Tom talked about on that episode, the one that he was on, was basically his To the Stars and all the weird UFO and alien stuff that they're doing. So that one was pretty cool. Not the best podcast episode by far. If you've seen that one, it's a wild episode. It's very, very weird. But I don't watch all of his episodes. I'll really only watch one or I'll watch them when he's got someone on that I'm really interested in listening to, because it'll be a 2 to 4 hour long conversation with that person. So I've watched, Elon Musk. I've watched a lot of astronomers, or any, Neil deGrasse Tyson when he's on, when David Fravor was on and they were talking about chasing the Tic Tac UFO in 2001 or 2003, whenever that was. I like listening to historians. Whenever he's got Dan Carlin on, I listen to Dan Carlin's stuff. I like learning when I'm listening to a podcast. That way I don't feel like I'm completely wasting my time. I'll have a podcast on when I'm down in the laser shop and I'm working down there. And or if I'm driving on a long drive now. Before, I never, ever, ever. I mean, I remember when like Sirius radio came out and people started listening to speech more, like more talking, like before we knew really that podcasting was a thing. I'm a musician. I like listening to music. So I never, ever once thought on a long drive to Florida, I'd want to listen to somebody talk. That seemed so boring. It seemed like it would put me right to sleep. But now, oddly enough, when I'm on a long drive, if I get bored of listening to a certain album or, certain style of music, or if I'm getting tired, I'll put a podcast on. But I'll put a podcast on that, incites thought. And I find that it wakes me up because I start thinking about what they're talking about more. And so I can't really answer that question. I don't have a favorite episode of Joe Rogan's. But when Dale Earnhardt Jr. was on, that was a really good one. Dale Earnhardt Jr. talked about his childhood, getting into racing, Dale Earnhardt being his dad, and what that dynamic was like. So there's a handful. I'd have to sit down and think, I guess. But ones like Dale Earnhardt, some of the Elon Musk ones, I'll go back to and listen to more than once just to kind of absorb some information. Only a few more. Let's see. E24 Tom, my friend Tom Caffrey from England, says Land Rover Defender 90. When? I don't know, Tom. But a four-wheel drive project in general has been kind of in the back of my head lately, the last couple of years, more so than it ever has. And when I was over there last, 2019, when I was over there hanging out with you guys and Ben, we went to your guys' local auction yard. I think it's like a car museum, but they hold a car auction there. And we went to go look at what was going to be going across that upcoming auction block. And there was a Classic 1 Range Rover there. And I absolutely love those. And in particular, the 3 doors, or what we call here in America, the 2 doors. But I really want a Classic 1, but I want a proper British, right-hand drive 3-door Classic 1. I'd take a 5-door for sure. I think that one's going to take precedent over a Defender for me because I just love that boxy look. Michael Jordan had a black on black 5-door Classic 1 Range Rover. It might have been a Classic 2, but I'm pretty sure it was a Classic 1 in the mid 90s when he was playing for the Bulls. And I remember watching all of the behind the scenes when he'd roll in to practice and stuff at the Chicago Stadium, and he'd be driving that Range Rover. And I'm like, I want one of those so bad. So I think that's next on the list as far as a 4-wheel drive project goes before a Land Rover. Truls Venman says, if you had to drink a soda, which brand? And out of a bottle, can, or cup? Well, that one's real easy as far as the container. A bottle, all day long. So a glass bottle, we'll go there. Glass bottle, I guess I'll back up. I don't drink beer, so it's hard for me to relate to people who have a lot of things on draft, whether or not they drink it out of a glass bottle and then out of an aluminum can. So as far as root beers go, there are a few places where I've gone where they actually brew the root beer and you can get it on draft there. Then you'll have that out of a glass bottle. You'll have big root beers like Mug and Barks and some of the bigger root beers that will offer their root beers in a plastic bottle. And then you can also get them in an aluminum can. Normally out of a cup, they're probably coming out of a fountain machine, which is the manufacturer's syrup mixed with a carbonated water. And that is the least favorite for me. I'd say an aluminum can and glass bottle as far as containers that you can get them in. Draft, first of all. Right off draft in a glass, no ice. And that's the way I take my root beers if I'm at a place that has it on draft. Then glass bottle probably, then aluminum can. Then it's anything plastic or paper from there. And I think that might hold up unless it's someone's particular opinion or their particular taste, that's kind of, I think, the industry standard as far as what people would really enjoy drinking their beverages out of. Truls Venman also says 190E 2.516 Evo 2, stock or modified? If modified, what would you do to it? So if this was a real Evo 2, like one of the 502 Evo 2s, at this point you leave it stock because it's worth $250,000. But that aside, if I had one and wanted to do whatever I wanted to it without it losing any money or any value, I should say, I would just tune it for the track better than it already was, which wouldn't require hardly any more work. Those Evos have such a high radius arch than the normal 190s do, and all of the quote-unquote stock Evos had such a huge wheel gap up front because that arch was just so big. So I would obviously lower it, and I wouldn't bag it or anything. I would do like a race suspension, control arms, coilovers, make the thing like a track monster, but it would have to be aesthetically pleasing to me. So I'd lower it a little bit. I would do different wheels. I do like those Evo 7-spoke wheels, 6 or 7-spoke. I think they're 6. Regardless, I would definitely lower it down a little bit, hug it down to the ground so I had a little bit more of that menacing look, get rid of that wheel gap, and run like a European 3-piece motorsport wheel. Whether or not it was a BBS RS or like a E76, like a magnesium-centered BBS motorsport wheel. It would be a black Evo 2 on probably a gold center 3-piece BBS wheel. So German car, German wheel, hug down to the ground, throaty exhaust, and man, that's the dream. That's the unobtainable dream. I say that now. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if I'll be successful enough in life in the future and have the opportunity to purchase one at a ridiculously good price, even if that meant it needed full restoration. If it was one of the original 502 Evos and I was able to purchase it, I would, for sure. So I wouldn't do much. Mercedes really didn't do any wrong when they built that car, so there's not much else that really needs to be done to it. So I wouldn't bastardize it in any way, especially for what they're worth now. So that was the last question, though. And I think I'm just going to leave it there. Just a short and sweet one. Almost an hour. Almost did it. I start blabbering on and start staring at the wall and going off in different directions if I sit here alone for too long. And it sounds like my voice is leaving me too for some reason. So might have been what I ate tonight. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. Thank you guys for sending in some questions. It helps for content creation for some of these solo episodes. That way I can at least get one out a week and make it feel like I'm actually doing something with this podcast. Don't know what's in store for next week. I'm hoping I'll have some shop updates, hoping I'll have more project updates, and yeah, hopefully I'll have more content coming up on the YouTube just in general for what's going on. And that's about it. Follow along on Instagram, John, John .Ludwick, Ludwick. Ludwick's Garage on Instagram. The Rising Sea, I already plugged that. And the Governor's Club. I haven't done much on an Instagram. I think October was the last time I posted from it. Yeah, I'm the worst with that. But follow along on Instagram stuff. That's usually where I'm active most. If you guys have any merchandise you want to get made for your brand or business, shoot me a direct message on the Ludwick's Garage Instagram. That's not just for the automotive projects. I've integrated Night Laser and all of the laser engraving stuff I'm doing, which is my full-time job, attempted full-time job. So reach out there on Ludwick's Garage. I do all sorts of leather key rings, leather patches. People put them on hats, shirts, etc. I do a lot of wood stuff. If you guys are watching on Instagram, you guys can see these walnut wood cup coasters I have here on the table. The microphone end caps. These are laser cut, laser engraved that I made. Even my leather-bound notebook is laser engraved. But yeah, reach out there if you guys need any leather key rings made for your brand or business. Yeah, that's my main plug. That's the plug that pays the bills. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. You can hear this on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, etc. And links to the Instagrams are in the YouTube description below. So thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of the week, and hopefully I will see you guys again next week. Thank you.